Hey y'all, welcome to this week's episode of Unfit to Print. I'm your host Amber Athey. I'm the Washington editor for The Spectator and a senior Blankley fellow with the Steamboat Institute. Before we get started, please subscribe to the show on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review. And if you would like to become a premium subscriber, please head over to amberathey.supercast.com. WNBA player Brittney Griner has officially been sentenced to 9 years in a Russian prison after being accused of illegally smuggling drugs into the country. Griner was originally detained by Russian officials when they found cannabis oil in her luggage. Griner claims that she didn't realize that she had a cartridge of cannabis oil in her carry-on bag, but did end up pleading guilty to the charges in the hopes that the judge would give her a lighter sentence. Obviously, that did not happen. She did end up getting 9 years, which I think no one would argue is not an excessive and unjust sentence. Now, we've seen the usual takes of people saying that Brittney Griner deserved it because she's an America hater and she should have known better than to go into Russia with drugs in her suitcase. I'm willing to take Brittney Griner at her word that she forgot that the cartridge was in the luggage. I know I've been through security a few times here in the US where I have a pocket knife that I completely forgot about, or some other item that just happened to be left over in my bag from an earlier trip that got caught in security. Luckily, I've never tried to travel into Russia with one of those items, so I was not detained and then sentenced to an unjust jail sentence. Now, on the charge of her being an America hater, it is true that Brittney Griner has said in the past that she would not stand on the WNBA basketball court while the national anthem was playing, seemingly in solidarity with protests sparked by people like Colin Kaepernick, who believe that America is a fundamentally racist country and therefore they should not be standing up in front of our flag because the flag represents that racist system. So, of course, I have a little less sympathy for Brittney Griner because it is very ironic that she would crap all over the United States and then, of course, as soon as the going gets tough in a foreign country, she wants the US government to step in and help her. That being said, she's still an American citizen, so I don't think that her disgusting views mean that we shouldn't help her. However, I don't think that she should be receiving special treatment from the Biden administration. And so far, it seems like that's what she's going to get. And of course, it's because she is a quote-unquote celebrity. She is a black lesbian who is considered, worthy of special protections to the Biden administration. And she's spoken out on all of the progressive policy issues that make her a hero to other celebrities in the United States. So far, the United States is apparently looking at trading Brittney Griner for a weapons dealer that they have sentenced to 25 years in an American prison. This is obviously a completely lopsided trade, and even the Washington Post editorial board warned against making this kind of trade with Russia, saying that it's good to try to free Brittney Griner and bring her back home because the sentence is obviously unjust, but it can't be done at any cost. Again, in an ideal world, then yes, we would bring Brittney Griner home, as well as the hundreds or thousands of other Americans wrongly detained in foreign countries. But as Peter Van Buren writes for my organization, The Spectator, he is a former State Department official, and in all of these cases he saw across the globe where Americans were wrongfully detained or given harsh sentences for relatively minor crimes, the common denominator was always drugs. And the difference between Brittney Griner's case and the case of all those other Americans is that he wasn't allowed to intervene. Brittney Griner instead is getting this additional special treatment because of her status as a woke celebrity. Van Buren talks about a specific case involving a Navy lieutenant who went hiking with his family in Japan and then suffered acute mountain sickness on the drive home. This illness caused him to black out and get into a car accident that ended up killing 2 Japanese citizens. Even though the family of this Navy lieutenant offered millions of dollars to the family of the Japanese citizens as payment, these Japanese citizens still demanded that the Navy lieutenant go to jail. He is currently locked up on a 3-year sentence for a traffic accident that was caused by a medical episode. So the State Department hasn't advocated on behalf of this Navy lieutenant who was involved in a car accident only because he had a medical episode and is now serving time in prison. And yet Brittney Griner is being considered in a trade with an arms dealer who sought to kill American citizens. It's also quite interesting to hear from the specific people who are outrightly defending Brittney Griner, beyond just saying the sentence was unfair and if we can get her home, we should. These people are basically saying that she did nothing wrong. And their response is that Brittney Griner had no choice but to go to Russia because she doesn't make enough money playing in the WNBA. Now, Brittney Griner makes about $200,000 a year by playing on a WNBA team. Considering the fact that the WNBA basically makes no money, I would think that's a pretty good deal. You get to play a sport for a living, and you get to make a nice upper middle class salary while doing so. And yet that's not enough. She also gets millions of dollars in endorsement deals, but she still apparently had to go to Russia to play in the basketball league over there because she's too poor to function living in Arizona. Cut me a break. If only Brittney Griner made as much as LeBron James, these leftists have lamented, then none of this would have ever happened. Again, never mind the fact that nobody watches the WNBA, and the WNBA is probably thrilled at Brittney Griner being detained because this is the first time anybody is actually talking about them in years. And these are the same people, by the way, who said when Otto Warmbier, a University of Virginia student who was detained and eventually killed by North Korea after allegedly stealing a propaganda poster, said that he was just another white privileged frat boy who thought he could get away with anything and finally learned how real justice works. Apparently, those same rules don't apply to Brittney Griner because she ascribes to the same political worldview as the progressive left. Also involved in the blatant hypocrisy surrounding the Brittney Griner case is none other than Vice President Kamala Harris. She released a statement saying, quote, "With today's sentencing, Russia continues its wrongful detention of Brittney Griner. She should be released immediately. POTUS and I and our entire administration are working every day to reunite Brittney as well as Paul Whelan with loved ones who miss each of them dearly." Never forget, though, that Kamala Harris was the one pushing draconian and aggressive sentences for people accused of drug possession when she was a district attorney and then attorney general in California. I don't want Brittney Griner, nor would I want any American citizen to be rotting in a Russian prison. But it's a lot harder to feel sympathy when you realize that the only reason she is getting such fanfare and such concern from the Biden administration is because she is this protected celebrity. I hope that this case brings attention to the thousands of other Americans who have been unjustly detained and sentenced to harsh physical labor or time in the gulag for very minor offenses, and in some cases, for no offense at all. And finally, consider this. If you're the type of person who is protesting America because you think we're such a racist, horrible country, maybe rethink that when you look at athletes like Brittney Griner who go abroad trying to make a quick buck and quickly realize that they had it a lot better on this side of the Atlantic. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi took an unprecedented trip to Taiwan this week, and there's a lot of differing opinions both on what the impetus for her trip was, what the political implications are, and whether or not she should have gone in the first place. And surprisingly, I've actually seen a lot of Republicans applauding Nancy Pelosi for her decision to supposedly stand up to China. And I understand that impulse. Of course, we want to be tough on China. That was actually one of my favorite aspects of former President Donald Trump's foreign policy, was his ability to get into that trade war with China and try to onshore more manufacturing industries in the United States. But we're talking in Nancy Pelosi's case about a very unnecessary provocation. The United States domestically is facing a lot of turmoil right now. We have a supply chain crisis and shortages of all kinds of necessary products like food across the country. We also have issues with our own southern border with millions of illegal immigrants now coming across the border every year. In fact, every couple of months, thanks to the Biden administration's inability or unwillingness to secure the southern border. We have rampant crime in our cities as the left moves to defund the police and institute progressive prosecutors that don't actually prosecute crimes and instead let criminals back out on the street. So the idea that we need to be trying to wage a proxy war with China through Speaker Nancy Pelosi right now, I think is a bit illogical. We don't really need to be poking that bear right now. And we certainly don't need this when we have the Biden administration and Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who are certainly not very adept at navigating these foreign policy challenges. This is, by every measure, completely the wrong time for Nancy Pelosi to be trying to stick it to the CCP. So I would just say to Republicans or conservatives who are applauding Nancy Pelosi for apparently finding a backbone and standing up to China, not only is this the wrong time for that, but also I think you're really missing the point. If we actually dig into why Speaker Nancy Pelosi was going to China in the first place, then we see that the reasons probably have very little to do with her actually deciding to stand up to the communist regime in China. We know that the United States has a long history of strategic ambiguity in regards to whether or not China actually controls Taiwan or owns Taiwan. What that means is that the U.S. has sort of tepidly said that if China were to invade Taiwan, they would feel obligated to respond and to help protect Taiwan's independence. But they also have not explicitly stated that Taiwan is an independent country from China, nor have they really done anything to supposedly recognize it as its own country through official diplomatic channels. President Joe Biden actually made a huge gaffe earlier in his presidency when he was asked about what would happen if China were to invade Taiwan, and he actually promised and vowed to defend Taiwan's neutrality, which is a step beyond this policy of strategic ambiguity, which is sort of a will they or won't they type of question. So let's go back and listen to what Biden said during this gaffe. Watch this.
You didn't want to get involved in the Ukraine conflict militarily for obvious reasons. Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are.
That's the commitment we made. That's the commitment we made. We are not, look, here's the situation. We agree with a one China policy. We signed on to it and all the attendant agreements made from there. But the idea that it can be taken by force, just taken by force, is just not appropriate. It will dislocate the entire region and be another action similar to what happened in Ukraine. And so it's a burden that is even stronger.
Now, immediately after Joe Biden said that, the White House immediately tried to walk it back, claiming multiple times that there was actually no official change in the U.S.'s policy towards Taiwan. So then, fast forward to this week, and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi decides that she needs to actually go visit Taiwan, because under this strategic ambiguity policy, the U.S. is really somewhat forbidden from sending high-level officials, which she is considered one, believe it or not, to Taiwan. Typically, they would only send low-level staffers or low-level officials. So Nancy Pelosi has really upped the stakes here. And the question is why? Why would she do this? Why would Nancy Pelosi, who is a Democrat, openly flout the Biden administration, which is also Democratic, and ignore all of their warning signs telling her not to go? Biden gave this little statement about how the military apparently said that it wasn't a good idea. Well, first of all, Pelosi clearly doesn't have any respect for the Biden administration. That's the first issue at hand here. Pelosi, I assume, is on board with the rest of the Democratic establishment that clearly does not want Biden to run again in 2024. So she's not going to adhere to the whims of the Biden administration. She is going to pave her own way. Second, why would Nancy Pelosi ignore the Biden administration? Nancy Pelosi, in her home district, has a very high pro-Taiwanese constituency, and a lot of Asian Americans actually reside in Nancy Pelosi's district. So, politically speaking, it makes sense for Nancy Pelosi to go to Taiwan because she doesn't have to deal with any of the potential consequences and fallout with China. That's going to go back on the Biden administration. But she gets to reap the political benefits because her constituents back home are going to applaud her for allegedly standing up for the CCP. Now, finally, and most importantly, in June, Nancy Pelosi's husband actually purchased $5 million in a computer chip company called, I actually don't know how to say it, NVIDIA, we'll say NVIDIA. And this was very odd because there are tons of chip shortages across the United States. Chips are becoming overwhelmingly expensive, and the US actually imports a lot of our microchips. So a lot of them are actually made in Taiwan, believe it or not, and China. So it was quite odd that Nancy Pelosi's husband would invest in the microchip industry at this time. However, about a month later, Congress, led by Nancy Pelosi, passed the CHIPS Act, which subsidized a large portion of the US-based semiconductor and microchip industry. Now, this didn't actually benefit NVIDIA a whole lot because NVIDIA actually subcontracts with one of the largest chip makers in Taiwan. So even though NVIDIA is an American company, they actually do most of their manufacturing abroad. So Nancy Pelosi goes to Taiwan, and she actually specifically talks with foreign diplomats there and local business owners about the passage of the CHIPS Act. And the main thing that she promises them is that even though the U.S. has decided to greatly subsidize its own microchip industry, there's still going to be room for cooperation between the U.S. and Taiwan on the manufacturing of microchips. So by taking this trip to Taiwan, she is backing up the CHIPS Act with a promise to Taiwan that would help secure her husband's investment in NVIDIA. And so it wouldn't be surprising if we saw NVIDIA and other microchip manufacturers who actually contract with foreign companies to see their stocks rise in the coming weeks after Nancy Pelosi's promise. So once again, Nancy Pelosi appears to be doing politics to benefit her own pocketbook. This is sort of insider trading, if not illegally so, at least ethically so, that we've come to expect from so many wealthy members of Congress. And Paul Pelosi might need that extra money because he now has been arraigned on the DUI charges that he was recently arrested for and has been accused of having drugs in his system at the time of the crash. So he might need a little bit of extra money for his legal defense. I also want to take a little moment for an aside and just bring up the point of why we are even manufacturing so many of our microchips abroad in the first place. We learned at the beginning of the pandemic that it is a very bad idea to have key parts of industry offshore because when something like a pandemic hits or when some national security crisis hits, we are suddenly left without these necessary goods that we need. We were not able to get PPE, for example, from China because they were withholding it from the rest of the world. So why would we have microchips, which are vital to our national defense, which are vital to pretty much every piece of technology that we use nowadays? Why would we be reliant on China or Taiwan for those microchips? And one of my criticisms of the Trump administration was that they were not more aggressive about reshoring the microchip industry when Trump was in office. In fact, he actually protected one specific company by the name of Qualcomm, which did most of its business in China. It's one of the world's largest chip companies. It has a very close relationship with China. And in 2018, Donald Trump issued an executive order that prevented a U.S. company, Broadcom, from purchasing Qualcomm in a $117 billion corporate merger. Broadcom's headquarters was actually in Singapore at the time, but then they moved their company to the U.S. after this deal was denied. And why would Trump want to protect Qualcomm, who has this relationship with China? Well, the US government apparently relies on a lot of Qualcomm's chips for its national security issues. So we have a company that does most of its business in China that is making these chips that could easily be hacked or compromised by our foreign adversary. So none of it makes any sense. A lot of it, I'm sure, can be tied back to corporate interests and shady government deals and connections. But back to the Pelosi question on Taiwan. The fact that she went after her husband invested in this company is very, very bizarre. And I saw a very interesting theory about why we even knew about this trip in the first place from Congressman Chris Stewart. And he was explaining on the Glenn Beck podcast that sometimes U.S. officials would make these trips to Taiwan, but you would never know about it. They would do it secretly. They would go and they would have their diplomacy, but it would never get in the news because that was an easy way to have these conversations without provoking China. So why did Nancy Pelosi's trip get leaked to the media? Well, he suspects that it was actually the Biden administration that leaked it in the hopes of actually canceling Nancy Pelosi's trip. Listen to Chris Stewart's explanation.
I don't think Nancy Pelosi announced that she was going to Taiwan. I think the Biden administration leaked it. And you have to ask yourself, why would they do that?
Why?
So is there anyone who thinks that 10% for the big guy wants to provoke China? Because this president doesn't want to provoke China. He wants to kowtow to China. And a really good example of that is, why in the world is it so hard for this administration to say the truth about the origins of the coronavirus? I mean, a 7-year-old could look at the evidence and say, yep, it almost certainly came from the lab. And yet they're reluctant. In fact, it's impossible for them to do that. They just simply won't. And I think that's a good example of they don't want to provoke China. They thought Pelosi going there would be a provocation. Therefore, they leaked it, I think, and there are others who believe this as well, in order to compel her not to go. And to her credit, Glenn, I think, and oh my gosh, I can't believe I just said that about Nancy Pelosi, but in this case, it's true. To her credit, I
weirder
think
things have happened.
Landed there just well, and the evidence is she probably landed there just a few minutes ago. I think they were scheduled to land at about 10:05 p.m. local, and it's like I say, just a few minutes ago. We don't know for sure if she is.
So we've explored why Nancy Pelosi might want to go to Taiwan. Why would the Biden administration want to stop her? Well, two possible reasons. The first is sort of the easy explanation, which is that they're still kind of reeling from that gaffe Biden made, and they don't want to do anything else that would provoke China at a time of great domestic turmoil, right? So just trying to protect themselves from having to get in another foreign entanglement. The second reason, which is far more nefarious, could be that the Biden administration is acutely aware of the fact that Biden himself has a relationship with China because of his son's business dealings, and so they are trying to protect Biden's relationship with China and not let it get too adversarial because that could affect his financial outcomes as well. So two potential reasons, but this plan backfired. When the Biden administration allegedly leaked that Pelosi was going to Taiwan, they all but ensured that she would have to make the trip. Because if Pelosi backed out at the last minute after Chinese foreign ministry officials were threatening to shoot her plane out of the sky, it would have made Pelosi and by extension the United States look weak. So she had no choice but to go after the Biden administration leaked this. Perhaps they had tried to talk to her privately and express their concerns, and she was too bullheaded and too set on the trip to say no or back out, and so they thought that this was their last resort, but this was a plan that backfired. From top to bottom, this story about Nancy Pelosi going to Taiwan is nothing on its face what it seems. There's so much bubbling beneath the surface here, from Nancy Pelosi's husband's investments to the Biden family's connections to China to the historic policy of strategic ambiguity. Everything about this just reeks of government corruption. So I would caution my conservative friends from saying, yes, we should stand up to China, and look a little bit deeper below the surface on this one. The alleged moderate Democrat and champion of the coal industry has now sold out his own constituency in the name of putting forth the Schumer-Manchin Inflation Reduction Act. Is that a serious name? Joe Manchin has now negotiated a milder version of the Build Back Better bill that he had previously said that he would not vote for as the Democrats were pushing for it last year. Joe Manchin was the sole vote besides Kristen Sinema in the Democratic Party that refused to vote for Build Back Better, saying that he would only vote for bills that he felt he could go back and explain to his constituents in West Virginia. He said that he was worried about the bill's effects on inflation and also its effects on industry in West Virginia, particularly the coal industry. Well, now Manchin has seemingly forgotten all of those concerns and is pushing forward a bill that would hurt those same people that he claims he wants to protect. according to a nonpartisan analysis from the Tax Foundation, which, full disclosure, I interned for back in, I believe it was 2014, a long time ago. I was just a little budget and spending intern. But the Tax Foundation has done a study indicating the effects of this Schumer-Manchin bill, and they found that the initiative would eliminate roughly 30,000 jobs, full-time jobs, from the U.S. economy, and it would also reduce average after-tax incomes for taxpayers across every income bracket over the long term. In other words, it would raise taxes on pretty much everybody, even though Manchin, Biden, and other Democrats repeatedly promised not to increase taxes on individuals making less than at least $400,000 a year. And yet here we are. It also greatly affects none other than the coal industry, which is, of course, a huge part of the West Virginian economy. Also, according to that Tax Foundation study, the corporate alternative minimum tax that would be imposed by the Schumer-Manchin bill would increase taxes on the coal industry the most, and the second most affected industry would be automotive and truck manufacturing. So if you think the cost of energy and the supply chain issues are bad now, just wait until the Schumer-Manchin bill goes into effect, and you are going to long for the days when gas was $4.69 a gallon. Manchin is a phony. They call this the Inflation Reduction Act. As I said, that is a joke. It is obviously a lie. It feels like gaslighting the American people. And it's a good reminder, Manchin's flip-flop, that conservatives and people on the right cannot keep falling for these false prophets. It seems like time and time again, we put our faith into people because they say one right thing or do one good thing, even though they completely disagree with us on pretty much every other policy, and in some cases even flat out hate us. And then somehow we have the gall to act surprised or disappointed when they turn around and do the thing that they said they weren't going to do. Great example of this is pretty much anyone in Hollywood. We keep deluding ourselves into thinking that if someone expresses a somewhat rational opinion, like if they say that the coronavirus restrictions were too stringent, or that they think the pronoun issue is a bit silly, or we have a comedian that makes fun of all of the transgender nonsense, we're like, oh yeah, they're on our side. They must be a secret conservative. And then give it a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and they're either apologizing to the woke mob or making very, very clear that they do not identify as a conservative and actually think conservatives are pretty horrible people. Now, this is a little bit different because Joe Manchin always said he was a Democrat. But remember, he even sort of flirted with the idea of going over to the Republican Party after he was ostracized for killing the Build Back Better deal. So apparently that didn't last very long, because instead of actually leaving his party, he decided to go back and promise to negotiate, because apparently that sweet, sweet love from Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi was just too much to resist. I have to admit to you guys that I will always have a little bit of a soft spot in my heart for Taylor Swift's music. The reason being is I grew up on it. When her first album came out, I believe I was in late elementary school, maybe early middle school, and she had an unparalleled ability to write about young love. So her songs always resonated with me, and as Taylor Swift got older, so did I, and so it felt like her music was evolving with my own life. But man, her politics are really freaking annoying, and as a person, I just cannot stand her anymore. So it all kind of went downhill back in 2018 when Taylor Swift decided that she was going to finally get political. And there had been swirling rumors for years that she was actually a secret Trump supporter, but those were only fueled because she was so quiet about politics. And there's this prevailing theory on the left that if you choose to be apolitical or not talk about politics, then you must be a secret conservative. We talked on the show, I believe it was last week or the week before, about all of the rumors about Chris Pratt because he posted an Instagram post that was supportive of police and wore like a pro-military t-shirt one time, and that was somehow proof that he was a raging right-wing extremist. And that was sort of how it was with Taylor Swift. And then it didn't help, of course, that she was a country music singer until she transitioned over to pop music. But in 2018, she posted on Instagram this really long diatribe about how she's pro LGBTQ rights and she hates people that deny human rights. She accused Marsha Blackburn, who was running for Senate in Tennessee at the time, of being this horrible anti-human rights person and said that she doesn't align with her values. She told her followers that she was going to vote for Phil Bredesen for Senate and Jim Cooper for House of Representatives and urged all of her followers to do the same. So came out as a full-blown lib, and as I said, it all went downhill from there. Since then, she's expressed a variety of opinions on everything from guns to Trump to transgender issues, and really has run the gamut of these woke policies that are so beloved and cherished in Hollywood. Well, somehow Taylor Swift has managed to be one of the celebrities that really hasn't faced much ire from the woke mob. And some of you who are really clued in to Taylor Swift drama will say, whoa, 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 Amber, you're forgetting about the time that she was canceled by Kanye West and Kim Kardashian. I promise you I'm not forgetting about that. That didn't have anything to do with politics. That was a feud about whether or not Taylor Swift gave Kanye West her permission to call her a bitch in one of his songs. And Taylor claimed that she didn't, and then Kim Kardashian released a recording claiming she did, and then Taylor Swift released her own longer recording, claimed that the conversation was misrepresented. But long story short, it led to people branding Taylor Swift with the snake emoji for like 2 years. She went into hiding. She didn't do anything in public. And then she released this really aggressive album called Reputation, addressing all of the rumors and basically playing this part of being the villain that everyone had claimed she was. To all of my male followers, of which I believe 75% of you are, I'm really sorry that I just had to rehash all of that drama for you, but hopefully you found it at least slightly interesting. So anyway, she was canceled for a short period of time, but it was over weird celebrity feuding drama and not about politics. It's pretty atypical, I think, for a celebrity to come out as super woke and not have some misstep that angers the woke mob at some point in time. Katy Perry's pretty woke, but she's been accused of cultural appropriation like 6 or 7 different times. Chrissy Teigen's super woke, but then she was accused of bullying Courtney Stodden, who was a young reality star. Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel were forced to apologize for their past instances of blackface, even though Jimmy Kimmel in particular was a super anti-Trumper. And Demi Lovato, who changes they, zer, them's pronouns every week, was dragged by the woke mob for visiting Israel, which was seen as a tacit endorsement of Israel over Palestine in that conflict. So it's pretty common once these people decide to go full lib, go full leftist, the woke mob comes out and finds some reason to be upset with them. It's like putting a target on your back. But Taylor Swift has avoided that until now, because there is a new study out that found that Taylor Swift, out of every single celebrity with a private jet, is the one who emits the most carbon dioxide. According to digital marketing agency Yard, Swift's 2 private planes, that's right, she has 2 of them, must be nice, right? I would like maybe just a half of one, emit more CO2 in 7 months than 1,184 average people would in an entire year. Her 2 jets reportedly took 170 trips in just 200 days this year, and the average flight time is just 80 minutes. For comparison's sake, I live in Arlington, Virginia, and it takes me about 2.5 hours to fly down to Florida. So an 80-minute private jet flight is probably not that long of a car ride. I will say, if you're a celebrity on the level of Taylor Swift, You probably can't go on road trips a whole lot anymore just for security reasons. So I understand why she has the jet. I understand why she uses it. But a lot of these statistics seem very, very excessive. I actually did some searching on Taylor Swift's Twitter to see if she has written anything about climate change. I couldn't find anything on her Twitter account. That's not to say that she hasn't said anything about climate change before, but based on her positions on a whole bunch of other political issues, I assume that she is probably one of those Green New Deal nuts. And just like John Kerry, we have seen over and over again that all the celebrities who are bellowing about climate change are often the worst polluters in our society. Now, what was hilarious about this is Taylor Swift did not give the typical celebrity apology that we would expect when running amok from the woke mob. Usually we hear some carefully crafted PR statement about how they're grateful to their fans for bringing this to their attention. They're sorry for being so insensitive and offensive. They clearly have a lot of work to do and so much to learn, and they don't expect others to educate them because they must educate themselves, and they're going to promise to do better. It's pretty good, right? Well, actually what happened here is Taylor Swift's spokesperson tried to pass the buck. Her spokesperson said in a statement to BuzzFeed, Taylor's jet is loaned out regularly to other individuals. To attribute most or all of these trips to her is blatantly incorrect. So Taylor Swift's CO2 emissions are no big deal because she's just letting her poorer friends borrow the jets. That must be pretty nice. I guess that's her way of offsetting her carbon emissions, instead of what Greta did when she sailed around the world. She just loans out the jet to her friends, and since that's basically a charitable donation, then her carbon emissions don't really matter. I wish it were really that simple. And what Taylor Swift's spokesperson, or what she herself apparently did not realize, is that if you're going to go this route, you have to be prepared to totally double down and fight back. And this explanation, one, is not cutting it, and two, Taylor Swift doesn't want to piss off the woke mob because she agrees with them on pretty much everything, or at least pretends to. So this apology only enraged them more, and now she's going to have so much more backtracking to do than if she had just said, we're reviewing Taylor Swift's private jet usage. We are going to look for ways to cut carbon. As you know, Taylor Swift has a great security team. She routinely faces threats to her and her family. She has stalkers, and so it's simply not feasible or reasonable to expect her to travel outside of this secure private aircraft. I think that would be a reasonable thing to say. But saying, oh, well, my other celebrity buddy over here unfortunately can't afford their own private jet, so they actually pay a rental fee to borrow mine, therefore I'm not responsible for the carbon. I mean, come on. Is this broad serious? This also opens up Taylor Swift, I think, to a whole lot of other criticism about her lack of woke credentials. Because this past week, Lizzo and Beyonce were both bullied into removing the word spaz from 2 of their songs. Beyonce was the most recent artist who said that she was going to re-record a version of her song Heated off her new album Renaissance because the word spaz is short for spastic, which is allegedly ableist. Apparently using any terms like psychotic or crazy are ableist because they imply that mental health issues are negative and attach a stigma to people with mental illnesses. So the disabled community was very upset with Lizzo and Beyonce for using the word spaz, even though this has been a popular slang term for as long as I've been alive. Well, Taylor Swift has quite a few songs herself that contain so-called ableist language. In her song Blank Space, for example, she says that her ex-lovers might refer to her as insane. Can't say that. And in her song Me with Panic at the Disco's Brendan Urie, she says she went psycho. No, you cannot say that. And also, Brendan Urie says that there's a lot of lame guys out there, and you can't use the word lame because that is an insult to people who have physical disabilities and implies that there is something wrong with them. Back in 2019, a fan who is disabled actually wrote an article about Taylor Swift's use of ableist slurs, saying that she was disappointed and had a problem with Taylor Swift's lyrics. This fan wrote, "While it's trendy to use words referring to mental health terms like psycho or crazy, these words are often used negatively. Using these words adds to the stigma that surrounds mental illness. This stigma is oppressive and makes people with mental illness feel like there is something wrong with them," which of course is not true. So now that Lizzo and Beyonce have promised to remove the word spaz from their songs, shouldn't Taylor Swift stand in solidarity with them and agree to remove her ableist lyrics as well? And will she apologize to this disabled community for her oversight? Or will her spokesperson, like they did with the private jets, claim that this actually isn't Taylor Swift's fault at all and it was actually her co-writers? I don't know where this drama is going to lead, but I always find it delicious and so satisfying when people, particularly celebrities, bow down to the woke mob and lecture the rest of the US about how they need to adopt progressive politics, end up having those same things turned around on them. And after finally 4 years, Taylor Swift is the one in the crosshairs. So this is going to be probably more dramatic and even more satisfying than waiting over a decade for Taylor Swift to release the 10-minute version of All Too Well, where she drags Jake Gyllenhaal for being a man baby and for dating women half his age. So stay tuned. I think it's going to be good fun. Cleveland Browns quarterback DeShaun Watson, who was formerly with the Houston Texans, has been suspended for just 6 games and will not be fined after violating the NFL's personal conduct policy. DeShaun Watson had been accused of sexual assault and inappropriate conduct during massage sessions in civil lawsuits filed by 25 women. The alleged encounters took place when he was a member of the Texans team between March 2020 and March 2021. DeShaun Watson has settled 20 of the 24 lawsuits, 4 remain outstanding, and many people are shocked by the relatively light sentence that he received from the NFL. Disciplinary officer Sue L. Robinson concluded that Watson's conduct, quote, does not fall into the category of violent conduct that would require the minimum 6-game suspension, which the league had established as by far the most commonly imposed discipline for domestic or gendered violence and sexual acts. This is the latest example of how the NFL claims to be woke, but when it comes down to it, they are a league that protects criminals and allows them to make millions of dollars no matter how bad their behavior. The NFL, back during the controversy with Colin Kaepernick, was very accommodating to him. He was never fined for anthem kneeling. He wasn't fined for having cops portrayed as pigs on his socks. And the only reason he was pushed out of the league was because he had very poor performance as a quarterback. And anyone who would like to challenge that statement can just go ahead and look at his stats from his last season in the NFL. I can promise you it is not pretty. In addition, the NFL practically forced out Las Vegas Raiders coach Jon Gruden after some insensitive emails he sent came out a decade after they were first sent. Some of these emails were not ideal. In other ones, they're kind of funny. He says Joe Biden was a nervous, clueless pussy, and he called Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner, an anti-football pussy. And he probably shouldn't have put this stuff in professional emails, but the fact that he was actually pushed out of his job because of it was such an overreaction, and clearly, to me, a case of the NFL trying to pretend that they are all about holding people accountable and getting people to face consequences for their actions, so to speak. But in this case, the transgression did not match the level of the consequence. So you look at someone like Jon Gruden, who was forced out of his job because he said a few things that people found offensive, and they were in private emails that weren't even supposed to be released to the public. He lost his job. Then you look at DeShaun Watson, who has allegedly assaulted or harassed dozens of women, and he gets a mere 6-game suspension with no fine whatsoever. And the behavior continues throughout the league. DeShaun Watson's light sentence is just the latest in a long line of the NFL letting players get off the hook for whatever they want, and yet punishing people who have the wrong political opinions. For example, Antonio Brown, who was a Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver, was only suspended for 8 games after pleading guilty to burglary and battery. Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback Ben Roethlisberger was accused of rape by multiple women, and after the second incident was only suspended for 6 games. And the NFL only suspended Baltimore Ravens running back Ray Rice for 2 games until a video actually came out showing him assaulting his fiancée in an elevator. Former Atlanta Falcons quarterback Michael Vick somehow was able to return to the league and play for the Philadelphia Eagles after serving a prison sentence related to dog fighting. Dante Stallworth was suspended for just 1 season after killing a pedestrian while driving under the influence of alcohol. Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver Tyreek Hill pleaded guilty to punching and choking his pregnant girlfriend in 2014, but was still drafted into the NFL 2 years later. So, long line of individuals who have no business earning multi-million-dollar paychecks and being able to play football for a living, getting away with whatever they want because NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell wants to make money. And as long as you are talented enough on the field, it apparently doesn't matter what you do. But if you are a head coach who says something mean about him in an email, then you need to be pushed out of the league immediately. As the NFL promotes all of these woke politics by allowing anthem kneeling, and yes, their policy does technically say that players have to stand for the anthem if they're on the field, but they are allowed to wait in the locker room. Roger Goodell has been on record saying he does not intend to enforce that policy. And the NFL, of course, allowed Colin Kaepernick to get away with it and has repeatedly punished people like the Redskins offensive coordinator, who said that the January 6th riot was merely a dust-up. The NFL also makes millions of dollars in partnership deals with China, even though China has a spotty human rights record, to put it generously. So the NFL claims that they support players' activism on things like police brutality and human rights, but then they reward players who act like criminals and actually get charged and convicted of horrible crimes. They work with China, and they allow players to blatantly disrespect the country that affords them the ability to play a ball game for a living. All around classic that the NFL would only give DeShaun Watson a 6-game suspension. That's it for this week's episode of Unfit to Print. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And if you'd like to become a premium subscriber, please head over to amberathey.supercast.com. We will see you guys next week, and thanks again for supporting the show.